Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Foxborough Board of Selectmen meeting for Wednesday, November 19th. I'll read the agenda. 7 p.m. we open our meeting. We have a public hearing for Saga Hibachi Steakhouse, alleged alcohol violation. Second public hearing is for Showcase Cinema Deluxe, alleged alcohol violation. Third hearing is for, public hearing is for Tavolino, alleged alcohol violation. And the fourth item is to discuss the dates provided by the four businesses that were present at our last hearing. John, can you lead us at the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay. Attorney DeLuca, would you like to come forward, please? Okay, so I'd like to call up the first business, Saga Hibachi Steakhouse.
Good evening.
Evening.
Mark Stopa on behalf of Saga Hibachi Steakhouse. I'm joined this evening by Steve Lynn, the license manager, and Annie Chen, who is the restaurant manager. If I may preempt,
Could I have Attorney DeLuca swear everyone in? And
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. For all of those who intend to testify at this hearing, please raise your right hand. Do either of your clients intend?
no,
Okay.
I don't anticipate.
Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Madam Chair, with that, we have present Officer Noonan, who will provide the facts as to each of the hearings we have scheduled this evening. The intention is for Officer Noonan to provide that in a summary fashion. As I understand, each of the license holders stipulating to the happening of the event itself. It's not in dispute. And then each of the license holders will be given an opportunity to address the board directly with any information they feel is relevant in the facts of their cases.
excuse me, also, Attorney DeLuca, I need to have Ginny read the
We'll have
public
Ginny read the yes or no.
Do it now?
Yes, of course.
public notice. Thank you.
Legal notice. Notice is hereby given that the Board of Selectmen will conduct a public hearing on Wednesday, November 19th, 2014, at 7 p.m. in the Foxborough High School Media Center, 120 South Street, Foxborough, Mass., pursuant to its licensing authority in accordance with Massachusetts General Laws annotated, Chapter 138, Sections 23, 64, and 67, and all amendments thereto. The purpose of the hearing will be to review and discuss information concerning alleged violations of Chapter 138 that occurred at the Saga Hibachi Steakhouse, 295 Patriot Place, Foxborough, Mass. All interested parties are invited to attend.
Thank you.
Thank you. May I proceed?
Yes, please.
Okay. Officer Noonan, would you give your name and assignment, please?
My name is Sergeant Richard Noonan of the Foxborough Police Department.
Directing your attention to September 23rd or
25th, sir.
25th of 2014. Were you engaged in an operation here in Foxborough?
I was.
Could you give the board a brief description of the nature of that operation?
Under the direction of Chief O'Leary, I conducted alcohol compliance checks of all the licensed establishments in the town of Foxborough. During this alcohol compliance check, I had a 19-year-old underage operative that would enter each establishment following the guidelines set forth by our department. When he entered the establishment, he was under the careful observation of an undercover police officer. During this night, we visited 29 establishments, of which 9 failed.
Do you have that operative with you here tonight?
I do.
Could you point him out, please? He's pointing to the gentleman in the gallery, please. Now, you said that this was an operation and proceeded according to certain guidelines and a plan set out by the department.
That's correct.
Could you briefly describe exactly what that was?
We follow the ABCC regulations in regards to conducting compliance checks. with identification. During this procedure, myself, the underage operative, and the undercover officer review the rules and regulations outlining the procedures to be followed during this operation. The underage operative and the undercover officer explain completely and thoroughly as to what they're supposed to do and what to expect during the operation.
Now, does the operative have any identification on him?
He does.
And what is that?
It is his true, authentic, and valid Massachusetts license, which indicates that he is 19 years old.
Okay, and that's true here?
That's correct.
Okay. And how do you position yourself when you undertake that operation?
I am somewhere in the general area. Based on my interactions with most of the establishments, I'm highly recognizable, so I have the undercover officer maintain view of the underage operative.
All right, and that undercover officer is in the establishment?
He's within the, he's in, either in the establishment or within a close proximity to the underage operative.
And he keeps the operative in his sight line the entire
To the
time?
best of his abilities, correct.
What other instructions does the operative have with respect to requesting service?
Just to approach the bar, or in the case of a package store, bring a six-pack to the counter. But in this case, going to the liquor serving establishments, he's to approach the bar when asked for, if you'd like anything, he's to respond, requested a Bud Light. And then if he's requested for his identification, he would present his true, authentic, and valid Massachusetts license. If he was not requested his license, then he would proceed with his order.
Okay, and is the order paid for?
Yes.
Is there generally a receipt requested?
There, he asked if he can cash out. They'll present a receipt, at which time he'll make payment and then receive cash back and try to obtain a receipt.
Okay. Drawing your attention to Sega Japanese Steakhouse, was this operation undertaken at that location?
It was.
Can you give the board the details of that event?
At approximately 6:30 p.m., the underage operative entered Saga Hibachi Steakhouse, made his way to the bar. Upon walking up to the bar, he engaged the bartender in a conversation, at which time the bartender asked what he wanted. The underage operative requested a Bud Light. The bartender asked if he wanted a draft or bottle. The underage operative requested a draft, at which time the bartender poured him a draft of beer, put it in front of him, and then left the beer in front of the underage operative. The underage operative took possession of the beer and then asked the bartender if he could cash out, at which time the bartender presented a receipt to the underage operative. The underage operative made payment for the beer and left the establishment with the receipt.
Was there any request for identification in that exchange?
There was not.
I have no further questions for the officer.
Mark?
You ready?
I have nothing further in this instance now. If I don't know if there are any questions from council.
No, I have no
Any
questions.
questions?
We're willing to stipulate that there was a violation that evening, but I do have other information I wish to share, and obviously I want to be heard on
Okay.
what punishment gets meted out.
Are there any questions? Jim, would you like to start?
Not on the facts presented, thank you.
No, okay.
All set, Ginny? Do you have any questions?
At all? This is the only time we have opportunity to ask questions? Oh, okay. How crowded was the bar?
It was not crowded at all.
And what night was it during the week?
A Thursday night.
Was the was the manager on duty?
That I'm not sure.
Okay, and what was the disposition of the bartender? Was the bartender terminated, or was he?
To the best of my knowledge, I made contact with the manager that next day, advised him of the violation. I later spoke to the bartender later in the week, and he advised me that he had been terminated, but there's no way for me to verify that.
Okay.
Okay, and just to verify, the ID was never asked for?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mark, would you like?
Thank you very much. The Saga Hibachi Steakhouse takes very seriously its obligations regarding liquor liability, liquor violations, and their obligation to check for identification. All of the personnel are properly trained. The bartenders are trained. The servers and waiters and waitresses are trained. The unfortunate part of the formula, as we all know, that every business, whether if you're the owner, you pay close attention to the detail. The further you get down the pecking order with employees, you hope you have good employees, and that they're going to address their responsibilities as well. but it's the human condition. I can suggest to you that the bartender, who was in fact fired, was a very good bartender. He was extremely conscientious. He will be missed in the establishment because he was the kind of bartender that was fully engaged. He would keep an eye on the tables. If there was a table where it looked like somebody was going to be approaching being overserved, he would pull the waiter or waitress aside and say, no more to that table, keep an eye on these people. He was very, very conscientious. I'll suggest to you that if he were here and offering testimony, he would tell you that he had a really bad day personally that day, and he was off his game. He didn't ask for identification from one person. He lost his job. His employers are now here. They had to hire me, and we have to address the issues. So what they've done since then, the prior practice was if somebody didn't appear to be 40 or older, then you asked for identification. In working with my clients, they've now changed that. They are just taking identifications from everyone, irrespective of how old they look. That's the practice they have to go to, and there's a cost to that. I mean, they're running a business, and the more time you have to take doing those other kinds of things, and they do understand how important it is, but there's a cost, and there's a time value to all that. But nonetheless, they're addressing it that way. They're recertifying. They're making sure that all their people are certified or being recertified earlier than otherwise necessary. Ann Chen, who is the restaurant manager, just went through recertification, and they're trying to address the problem that way. I'll suggest to you that you have to understand what the business is like, and they're dealing with people in real life situations. It's the human condition. Sometimes mistakes are made. All right, now, so let's march from there to why do we do these compliance checks? I'll suggest to you, with all due respect, this is not intended to be a practice of gotcha. It's not supposed to be that. The ABCC has said over and over and over and over again that this is a tool to help educate licensees about the perils of serving alcoholic beverages. So I think we have to take that into consideration when we look at a business like Saga. It's been open for a year, not even a year. They had very good policies in place. They did everything they were supposed to do, and they had one very good employee have a very bad day and made a mistake. All right, so I understand this board's frustration because I live in town, I work in town, and I've been before you before on other violations like this. I understand your frustration that there were 9 failures, if you will, out of the 29 establishments that had the sting operation that night. But I'll suggest to you to punish my client to the maximum, which is what I understand this board did last week with all of the licensees that were before it, to punish them to the same extreme, to the max of the available under the first offense, simply because there were 9. Understanding totally that my client had nothing to do with those 8 other operations. They didn't cause those people to fail. They didn't have anything to do with their failure. It's purely a statistical anomaly, if you will. And I'll suggest to you that if we look back as to how this board has handled meting out punishment, therein lies some of the problem. Everything's about timing in life. If my client was before this board last year in November and had this exact same circumstance, and there were 4 establishments here last November with nearly the exact same circumstance, and they got letters of reprimand in their file, which I'll suggest to you was the appropriate punishment for my client. That's what should happen. The ABCC says educate by using this sting operation so they can see the perils of being a licensee, an alcoholic beverage licensee, and learn from it. That's what education's about, is learn from it. That's why we have first offense, second offense, and so on, and the punishments that go along with that. I don't think that it's helpful to just blanket and say, we're not going to look at the specifics of any one case. Everybody, all 9 who come before us this year are going to get the same punishment. That's not fair. That's not just. Just because my client, who wasn't even in business last November, didn't have this happen last November so that they could get that more appropriate treatment, if you will. They find themselves here, and as I understand it, facing 3 days of suspension of their license. I don't get that. I don't think that it's fair. I think that if this board is trying to make a statement about the severity and how serious the town takes these issues, and I agree with you in that regard personally. My client agrees that this is serious business, but you have to let people know what you're going to do. Now, neither my client nor any of the other establishments in town is going to look at what happened last year and say, well, we don't have to be so careful because all they're going to do is give us a letter of reprimand. They're not going to do that. But they need to fairly understand what's at risk. So as I understand it, there was some discussion about, well, I think we're going to start arresting the servers. Okay. If in your judgment that's the way to go, terrific. Maybe that makes it more serious. Maybe that's what you have to do. But don't you have to tell people that's what you're going to do? Instead of saying, well, we're really upset about these 9 violations this year. We're gonna just start charging the people who were involved this year. I don't see the ultimate fairness there. And I think the ABCC looks at these things and you're given a lot of discretion in how you manage all this. And I respect that, but I think as this board has said on prior occasions, there needs to be a case-by-case analysis. A careful decision needs to be made. One of the ones from last November, the license holder did everything they could, and the employee blatantly violated. Well, that sounds hauntingly familiar to the exact same scenario my client stands before you this November with. So why shouldn't they be treated the same way that business was last year? See, my client takes this seriously. In the likelihood of you ever seeing them back here before you on this violation is pretty nil. They understand. Now, they really didn't understand before, because I said to them, you got a letter back in January saying this sting operation was going to happen. They had no clue. No clue. It was just a letter from the town. They didn't understand the import. Why? Because they're not from around here. Their vision of Foxborough is the stadium and Patriot Place. So we're working to correct that. I've suggested they subscribe to the Foxborough Reporter or catch it online so they get the flavor of the town, because I had to explain that's not Foxborough. That's part of Foxborough, but Foxborough is a nice little town, and we take these kinds of things seriously here, and the Board of Selectmen take these things seriously here. So I had no way to know that this was a serious issue. They believed that they were doing absolutely everything possible to address those kinds of concerns. And again, but for an employee who blatantly violated his obligation to his employer, they find themselves before you. Obviously, no prior violations. It's much the same as some of the earlier decisions. But I'll also add that I think I didn't have any clients come in the last year, in 2013, when the compliance checks were done. Very proud of my clients for that circumstance. But on the other hand, I had one the year before, and how that was dealt with was very different. I think almost every one of those establishments had partial shutdowns on either 1 or 2 days for a couple of few hours. So if the decisions of this board on how to mete out punishment are to educate the licensees and to inform the licensees as to what the potential penalty is if they come before them, with all due respect, you're all over the place on this. But I think the fix has to be addressing that and saying, okay, we're going to change the way we approach first-time violators going forward, because then they're on notice. They know what's at risk. And I think ultimately that's the only fair way to do it. So I have a client, Saga Hibachi Steakhouse, who's before you with no prior violations, who absolutely did everything that they could to manage their restaurant and bar in an appropriate way. Everyone was trained. Irrespective of that, employee screwed up. He's lost his job. He had a family. He lost his job. I don't know where he is now. And perhaps he's subject to arrest for having served an underage person. They've done everything they could possibly do to try to sharpen the way they run their business to make sure it doesn't happen again. And all they're asking is that they be treated the exact same way those other businesses who went through this last year with the exact same fact pattern were treated, because that's ultimate fairness. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Comments?
Where to begin? One thing I've been for the last term and a half is I've been consistent, and I'd love to go back and forth on. And Attorney Stoper brought up a lot of good points, precedents, what's been done in the past, what one establishment expects based on what another establishment does or got punishment. But I'm going to be consistent. And the same thing that I asked last time, I'm going to recommend a 3-day suspension for probably reasons that could, and I don't want to go back and forth, but I have answers to every single thing that Attorney Stoper just brought up, why they should get a 3-day suspension. So I'm not going to go on a diatribe of a soapbox on why, but if I need to, I will during the discussion. But I would like to recommend to the board a 3-day suspension.
Mark, was the manager on duty at this time, or was there any other type of management on duty?
What's that? You both there? The restaurant manager was there.
Okay, was the restaurant manager, I'm not familiar with the establishment, but was the restaurant manager able to see the operative?
Well, there's a foyer, there's a fairly large bar, there's the restaurant area, there's kitchen facilities in back. Would she have been able to see him at some point? Likely. Was she on post, so to speak, just watching at the bar? No, I don't think that was the case at all. But it also is, we're talking about a scant couple of few minutes.
I know, absolutely. But the thing is, the operative, it's so painfully obvious that that young man is underage.
Oh, I don't disagree with you, and that it's shocking that the bartender, even having a bad day, would not pick up on that. No explanation. I've never talked to the man. I just know that he was fired and off he went.
But the management hired this bartender, trained the bartender,
right,
managed the bartender, supervised the bartender. Isn't the responsibility shared?
Please don't take my comments as suggesting that the management of this restaurant and bar is trying to escape liability. They fully understand that they're fully responsible for everything that happens in that bar. All I was suggesting is that there has to be acknowledgement that we have to rely on people to do their jobs. Anybody who's ever hired somebody, you can't possibly watch your employees every minute of every day, because restaurant managers have lots of obligations. And as it has been suggested to me by my clients when I met with them, is that this guy was a good bartender. Absent this mistake, he was a good bartender, and they really jumped to his defense by saying he helped maintain their responsibilities in the entire establishment, not just at the bar, but watching the tables and making sure that people weren't being overserved. He was diligent. And I've represented more than a few people with these kinds of, or a few establishments with these kinds of issues. I've never heard anybody just offer that kind of praise for somebody who was in their employ. Now, irrespective of that, they've lost a really good employee, and he's lost a job because he had to be fired. That's just the bottom line when these things happen, as you know, that they've got to be fired.
Can I just interrupt for something, for a point of order? I think it's appropriate, since we've already heard the facts, to vote in the facts, close that part of the hearing. And if we're already going into the punishment or the discussion, we've done it on every other hearing. It seems like we missed that on this one. So it's a little different than we've done on even up till last week.
Does anyone have any other questions for Mark?
I just don't want to mix the two. I just
Yeah,
want to make sure we
I
focus on what
Keeping us in sequence, that's
Yeah,
all right.
that's right.
I think Mr. DeVillis makes a good point.
Yeah.
However, each member of the board should have the opportunity to engage in any questions or discussions with counsel on behalf of the applicant before we close the hearing, and then we should close the
Oh,
hearing.
no, we're saying
Yeah.
this, but I think we
Yeah.
went through, we had no questions on the
Right.
facts. If we move past that, this sounds like it's talking about the
Right.
punishment of the.
But even still, though, like Mr. Gray was asking questions about process and procedure for, as a, the restaurant and its operation, and management and so forth, so.
Okay.
Any other questions? David?
Yeah. I wasn't here on this board in November. I'm assuming that you're client did receive the rules and regulations of the town as far as the liquor licenses when they got their license. Clearly, a first violation allows the board some latitude, up to 3 days. Take this very seriously, as I'm sure your client does. I have a question for Sergeant Noonan. I have a bad day, go in for a few drinks, I get pulled over. I'm over the legal limit. What happens to my license?
If you're arrested, your license will be suspended if you're over the legal limit.
Bad day is not an excuse. Sorry.
I'm not suggesting that it excuses anything. What I am suggesting is that there's a reason that the first offense has latitude, discretion, and that this board has discretion and latitude on how to mete out punishment. My impression of that is you take a look at the factual scenario that's before you, and you determine, okay, on one end of the spectrum, it's a certain fact pattern, and on the other end of the spectrum, there's more egregious behavior, still within the first offense, because keep in mind, no matter what happened out there that day, it was a first offense. Now, I'm fairly creative, but I don't need to put my mind to how egregious it could be, but go in your own minds how egregious any behavior in any bar in town could be in a first offense scenario, and I'll suggest to you that's where 3 days suspension is supposed to come in. And on the other end of the spectrum, with all due respect, I think you have the cases like this one. Keep in mind, nobody got hurt. It was a sting operation run by the police department. It was run very well. And I hearken back to what the ABCC says about these things. And they've said time and time and time again, this is an educational tool to teach licensees on how to better run their establishments. I think that we sometimes lose sight of that, and I share in your ire over having 9 of your establishments fail this compliance check. But still, on that short end of the spectrum, we have a well-run, otherwise well-run restaurant and bar with attentive managers who've trained everybody. Everybody's there, and high praise to the bartender who screwed up, but still, he screwed up, and I understand, and they're here, and it's costing them money, but if we look at the spectrum, with all due respect, how are they not on the lower end of the spectrum? Because I think that this board hit it right on the nose last year when it meted out punishment under the exact same factual scenarios of letters of reprimand.
Okay.
I think that's appropriate. And so if we're going to talk fairness and how we apply these things, and I understand the situation where somebody drinks too much and they get arrested and all that, and it's an appropriate analogy, but everybody should be treated fairly. The ABCC has come out, and the cases that comment on them says that fairness and equity in how you do this is really important. And just from a practical perspective, having to give clients advice, they asked me, what's going to happen? And I answered them honestly. I said, I have no idea, because here's what's happened over the last 3 or 4 years. I have no idea where this is going to go. And you know, maybe there's reasons for some of those differences, but I'll just keep it to last November and this time. And my clients weren't even here. They weren't even in business yet when those hearings took place last year, so they couldn't have learned from that, so to speak, because they weren't engaged with the town and couldn't have learned from it. What's the difference? The difference can't simply be that there were 9 that failed this year versus however many there were. I think it was 6 last year or something like that. That can't be enough of a difference, because that's not my client's fault.
Okay, thank you. Jenny, do you have any
Yeah,
questions?
just again, was the ID asked for?
It was not.
No. What day of the week was it?
Thursday night.
If on a Thursday night, with no one in the bar, ID was not asked for, what happens on a weekend when it's very busy? There's a lot of people in the bar. Was that just a bad day? How do you know the bartender can't have a bad day on Friday or Saturday?
Absolutely fair comment. I understand your point, and I can appreciate that, but we don't know. This might have been the only, I don't know if the guy's been a bartender for 15 years, and this is the only time he failed to ask, or if that was something that happened on a regular basis. We don't know, because those facts are not before the board, but what we do know is we had this violation, and my clients are stipulating that screw-up happened, that violation happened that night in exactly the way as Sergeant Noonan suggested it did. We have no qualms with that. Our piece on this is just treat us fairly, just like the other establishments in town have been treated in the past.
You know, when you talk about, when you receive a license, the manager's name is on the license, as are the individual names of the Board of Selectmen. So we all have a stake in this. And we rely that the manager is going to properly train their people. And a properly trained person doesn't need their boss standing beside them.
I agree.
So the fact that the manager wasn't, I don't know, did you say the manager was there? But it doesn't make any difference. Your bartender failed to comply with the laws of Massachusetts, the rules and regulations of the town of Foxborough. He didn't do his job, even though supposedly they were tips trained and they're reminded all the time. At the moment when the kid came, and he is a kid, he's a young-looking kid, he was not asked for his license.
I understand, and again, we've stipulated to that. I understand. It shouldn't happen. It absolutely shouldn't happen.
You know, it shouldn't happen if you call this a learning experience. At what point do you learn?
Well, but that's what, with all due
So-
respect, I think that's why we have the subsequent violation. We have discretion within the first violation to how egregious the facts are. Then you have subsequent violations. So if somebody doesn't learn, very clearly, this board knows how to mete out punishment to do that. I've witnessed it with other establishments in town, and deservedly so. We're not trying to hide from the facts of what happened here. But I will suggest, I started my first business when I was 13. I started hiring people at different businesses when I was in my late teens. No matter how good the employee is, they're still a human being, and humans make mistakes all the time. Now, this bartender made a mistake. He lost his job. Nobody got hurt. It was part of a compliance check. His bosses are getting hurt because they've got to be here and deal with this, and then now they've got to ramp up their efforts. At some point, particularly somebody who you know has been properly trained, who otherwise presents as a very competent bartender, I don't know, how do you stop people from making mistakes? I don't know how to do that.
Mr. Stopa, how can you say, if he didn't ask for a license, when this obviously young-looking person comes in asking for a Bud Light, how can you possibly say that the bartender was properly trained and following his training? If he doesn't,
Oh, I didn't say he
if he
followed his
didn't do
training. I said he was properly trained, and all evidence to the contrary notwithstanding, he had previously performed well at his job. And again, they gave him high praise for how he was otherwise engaged in helping them meeting their responsibility. I have no explanation as for why this man did that night. I have no idea how he could possibly look at that young man and say, yeah, sure, here's a beer. I don't understand that.
Well,
and neither does my client. And they're very frustrated by that because they asked me, what else could we have done? There's no crystal ball. They had no way of knowing that this guy was going to screw up that way. I mean, maybe he could have been the all-star bartender of the United States and out of the blue screws up. Or he could be the guy that you suggested he could have been by maybe he was screwing up every week. I don't know. They didn't see that. And those facts aren't before this board, and so I have nothing. I can't say whether or not that ever happened before, but what I can say is that they believed in his competence. They know he was properly trained because they saw to that. Now, once he's trained, he has the obligation, because he's got the job, to perform the way he was trained. Clearly, he screwed up. He didn't. He just didn't. I understand that.
and the manager's name, who's the name that's on the license, has the responsibility for the functions of the establishment.
Without any question. And they're standing up and they understand that, they take that responsibility seriously.
And all these rules and regulations are given with every license. And it's incumbent
Right.
upon the manager whose name is on the license to read these, knowing what the options are on the violations. We have the option of meting out the discipline. That's our option.
I understand.
And I think we've exercised our options in the past.
There's no question. And again, my comments as to what punishment gets meted out in this particular instance is, all they're asking is treat them the same as you did those 4 licensees that were before this board last year. on the exact same facts. Those people had the exact same responsibilities. They got those rules and regulations. They each had an employee who surprised their boss by screwing up. And all but one of those employees got fired. And I understand in the one circumstance where the employee wasn't fired, that licensee didn't get treated the same way. They got a little more punishment because they, perhaps because they didn't fire that employee. All I'm suggesting is fairness, equity, justice, so that whether it's my client or one of the other licensees in town tomorrow, they understand what's at stake, because this board has prospectively said what's going to happen. If this board's, I guess it's this board's prerogative to say from this moment forward, we're just going to give out 3-day suspensions on every violation. My comments to you is that it's colossally unfair in the middle of it to change your mind and say, well, whatever we did last November, we're not going to do. You're already here. We're going to suspend you for 3 days. I think that that's unfair. I don't think that educates. I don't think that's good for business. And if your good sense tells you need to do that going forward, then proclaim that that's what you're going to do. But treat the people who were before you as fairly as you did the last ones who came through with the exact same circumstances. That's the extent of where I'm trying to go with my comments. Again, not trying to hide from the violation at all. They take this very seriously. They're aghast that their bartender did this. They have no explanation for it. I don't know what more they could have done. I mean, they hired an otherwise competent human being, trained him properly, and sent him about to do his job. And by all appearances, he had been doing his job. At 6:30 on September the 25th, very clearly he did not do his job. No explanation for it, no excuse for it.
Madam Chair, can I just add, we're kind of going in a circle at this point.
I just wanted to let Ginny finish, and
I'm sorry.
I just had one more question, and then I think we're all set. Just in discussions about the actions that were taken to make corrections, so all patrons are being carded now. Do you believe that your clients would be open to participate in self-conducted compliance checks?
Can you define what that is?
For example, the manager could spot check and make sure that everyone's licenses have been checked.
Certainly.
In your, for example.
Yeah.
Okay.
They would certainly welcome that.
Okay. Just trying to think of, again, along the lines of education, as many possible things that could be done to help with that. Okay. So I think we are ready.
Jim had another comment.
Yeah, just one more point. I mean, we could, just to remind the board, when people talk about precedents, what we did last year or the year before, this board is made up of 5 individuals, and each year we've got members potentially could be leaving and new members can be coming in.
Mm-hmm.
So to look back at what we did as a board last year, keep in mind that this was not the same board last year, and it was not the same board as it was 2 years ago. So hold us to a standard of whatever anybody did the year before is not really fair, because that's not the way this system is made up. And if we're talking about precedents, we've tried the letters of reprimand before. And I'm looking at this not from the 9 violations or the numbers from before, but this individual one. It's been less than a year. We have a violation, regardless of what happened a year or 2 or 3 years ago. It's a new situation. And if it was crowded, or if it was a bad ID, or the lighting was bad or something, but not to ask for it, I don't know how much more violation that you can get by not even asking to start the process. That is paramount. I wish there was an excuse that it was too crowded, or, but it's a bad day or something like that. Just doesn't even come close to being an excuse. And then I keep hearing that, well, nobody was hurt, it's a learning experience, which this whole thing is. We're learning as we go as well. But if there was one beer and the kid sat there for 2 or 3 more beers and he drove out and killed somebody or himself, would we be having the same argument? What does it take for it to be a serious issue? I think not asking for it is probably the most serious violation that you can get with these rules and regulations. So we can keep going in a circle, but
I think, actually, Jim, what I'm hearing is that anything can be considered the first violation. It could be over-serving, could be the first violation. And so that, as an example, versus what is being presented this evening, the sting, which is, I think correctly stated, an educational tool by the ABCC. I think that's the difference that's trying to be explained here, so.
Well, no, I understand there's different, but when you look at over-serving.
So I think that's why the discretion is in here, again, in my mind, with the idea that very serious violations, these are our guidelines, and a terrible violation, first violation, could jump up to the third level,
Sure.
potentially. But I think what I'm hearing is that on the scope of what could be viewed as within a first violation, there is a wide range of events that could happen, and
Oh, I agree, and I'm not disputing that there's some subjectivity in it. But when you're saying, over-serving, I haven't been a bartender, but I think it would be more difficult to understand if someone was drunk or not. It's body type, it's weight, it's if they're drunk coming in. That is probably less in my eyes of an issue because it's more subjective. Not asking for the ID is blatantly a violation. And again, I was hoping that there'd be some circumstance that it was a mistake, but it was negligence. And that's where I'm, I just want to try to keep getting back when we're kind of going off in these different directions of the
Okay.
excuses.
all right, so are we ready for,
We need to approve the
Yeah, but
facts.
Yeah, it would be appropriate to motion to close the hearing and then move on.
do you do the finding facts prior to closing?
Yes.
Correct, all right. So I move that we have finding of fact that the employee of Hong Yi Inc., doing business as Saga Hibachi Steakhouse, served alcohol to a minor as outlined in the letter to the Board of Selectmen dated October 20th, 2014, and we accept the findings of the letter as presented.
I'll second that.
Any discussion?
In discussion, I think we should also reference the letter, but and also as well as a testimony that was given tonight, because we've got an attorney representing that says they agree with it. So not just the letter, but I think that the whole testimony that was received tonight.
Okay, so finding the fact that the employee served alcohol to a minor as outlined in this letter dated October 20th, 2014, and also the testimony as presented, we accept the findings.
And the business owners accept these as facts as well.
Okay.
And I'll second that.
Any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
May I inquire, are you going to hear the other two and then reconvene to
Yes.
determine? Okay, thank you.
Okay, the next public hearing is for Showcase Cinema Deluxe, alleged alcohol violation. Ginny, would you like to read the
Legal
notice?
notice. Notice is hereby given that the Board of Selectmen will conduct a public hearing on Wednesday, November 19th, 2014, at 7:45 PM in the Foxborough High School Media Center, 120 South Street, Foxborough, Mass., pursuant to its licensing authority in accordance with Massachusetts General Laws annotated, Chapter 138, Sections 23, 64, and 67, and all amendments thereto. The purpose of the hearing will be to review and discuss information concerning alleged violations of Chapter 138 that occurred at the Showcase Cinema Deluxe, 24 Patriot Place, Foxborough, Mass. All interested parties are invited to attend.
Thank you.
That's 7:45.
Yeah, at this instance, we're on time for this particular hearing. We will offer the testimony of Sergeant Noonan regarding the details of this event. So,
Do you need to swear anyone in?
yes, so we'll swear in anyone that's going to testify in this hearing. Please raise your right hand. You solemnly agree that your testimony in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, Sergeant Noonan, could you give your name and assignment, please?
My name is Sergeant Richard Noonan of the Foxborough Police Department.
Sergeant, drawing your attention to September the 25th, 2014. 2014. Were you engaged in a sting operation?
I was.
Could you describe that for the members of the board?
During this night, under the direction of Chief O'Leary, I conducted an alcohol compliance check of the licensed establishments in the town of Foxborough. During this compliance check, I used an underage operative who was 19 years old, which was verified by his authentic, true, and valid Massachusetts driver's license, and was assisted with a plainclothes undercover officer.
And did you have occasion to visit the licensed establishment that's identified as Showcase Cinema Deluxe?
I did.
Can you describe the premises for the board?
Showcase Cinema Deluxe is the movie theater located at Patriot Place. The bar that we entered was on the first floor of the establishment. When you walk into the foyer, to the right is the bar, to the left is the where you purchase tickets, and straight ahead is the concession stands.
And where did you position yourself in this particular instance?
In this instance, I was in the lobby watching the underage operative through a glass window.
Okay, and what did you see?
I saw the underage operative enter the bar area, engage the conversation with the bartender, at which time I observed the bartender serve him a draft of beer.
Okay. Following that observation, did you do any further investigation to determine whether or not there was any identification requested?
Based on my observations, I did not see the underage operative present any identification, and then upon talking to him after he left the establishment, he confirmed that he was not asked for any identification.
And was there a receipt recovered in this instance?
There was. The underage operative asked if he could cash out, at which time the bartender presented him with a receipt. He made payment, received change, and left the establishment with both the change and the receipt.
Okay. I have nothing further, or no further questions for Officer Noonan.
Thank you. Okay. Would you like to present?
Good evening, members of the board, Madam Chair. Peter Tam, for the record, Special Counsel for National Amusements, in this instance, Quincy Amusements Incorporated. With me is Joe Norman, Manager of Record, Showcase Cinema Deluxe. Madam Chair, if you'd allow me, I'm not going to repeat any objections that others have made in the context of first-time incidents with respect to any of these establishments. But Joe is here fully accepting of responsibility. He'll outline very briefly the actions he's taken since he was notified by the sergeant and by Chief O'Leary of this incident. I think the actions he's taken, from my perspective, reflect the degree of seriousness and responsibility. We collectively take this with utmost seriousness, and I want to convey that to all of you. I haven't been before some of you, but my involvement with some of these establishments goes back many years, and I worked with the chair on the revisions, and with Chief O'Leary, with the revisions to these very regulations for which we're discussing tonight. And it is correct, Mr. DeVellis is correct, the discretion is broad that this board has to impose. At the same time, there is a word which has some meaning in the regulations, and it goes to your discretion as a board and as the license granting authority, and that is the word grievous. So I think the chair is correct in that ultimately there is a ratcheting up, there is an incremental concept contemplated by the regulations. And so I know you're all fully aware of that, but in this instance, the primary concern that I've heard from the board and from others, including the chief, has been the sheer number of violations here. And you can look back, and I haven't, to see how many of them are first-time violations, such as with the cinema. And your frustration is understandable. The community's frustration is understandable. At the same time, with compliance checks and previous council's point about these compliance checks being intended for education is in fact true. And that's not my words or his, though those are the words of Ted Mahoney of the ABCC, the chief investigator. They're intended to ensure vigilance, but your discretion yet is broad. So, and I completely agree with Mr. DeVellis's concern about this board being different from those boards in the past, and consistency amongst similar categories for this board seems to carry some logic. I also appreciate the concern about due process and expectations, and that's something that the chair and I have discussed in the past, and that was why it was so important to establish some expectations. And I think that's what you're hearing from some of these first-time, some of these restaurants who are extremely beneficial to the town. And in this instance, no previous incidents, no complaints, right? It's a relatively quiet restaurant, which is an amenity for the movie theater. And without this young gentleman coming in, they would have gone about their business. Without there being a compliance check, it is conceivable that they would have never made a single violation. There would have never been one of the egregious examples that Mr. DeVellis has kind of indicated. So the egregiousness of the offense, the grievousness of it, as your regulations suggest, really is the key word when you talk about escalation and your discretion. That being said, I want to give Joe the opportunity to convey what he's conveyed to the chief in terms of what he's done in terms of his review. He's outlined it in a letter that I believe you have. He provided that to both Mr. Keegan and Chief O'Leary. If you don't have copies, I do have additional copies. After Joe has the opportunity to speak, I would just like to return with 30 more seconds of my thoughts.
Thank you.
So thank you. I want to thank all of you for allowing me to speak this evening regarding our failed compliance check at the theater, which occurred on September 25th. I wish to assure all of you, as well as the community, that I take full responsibility for what occurred and understand and appreciate the frustration all of you feel this evening. Ultimately, the results of the failed compliance check fall squarely on the shoulders of the person whose name is on the liquor license, and that person is me. I take responsibility for the actions of my staff member that night. His actions that evening do not represent how seriously National Amusements and I approach alcohol service, and literally go against the grain of the extensive training our staff receive. At this time, I'd like to recap what events have taken place since the failed compliance check and review what our training protocols are. The employee in question was terminated by me personally before the employee could work another shift. Additionally, I scheduled an alcohol awareness class for all employees who engage in the sale of alcohol. The class was conducted by Master Tips Trainer Mark Antonio, whose name I always have difficulty with, and in my opinion, he is the best in the business. This class took almost 2 hours to complete and focused on carding, identifying levels of intoxication, and how to handle real-life situations involving liquor service. Chief O'Leary was gracious enough to meet with me, where I reviewed the steps that we have taken, and I asked him if we felt we should do any, or if he felt we should do any additional steps. At that time, he told me he felt he was comfortable with the actions we have taken. I recapped everything in a letter to the chief, which again, Attorney Tam said he has provided you. And again, I accepted full responsibility for what occurred. And I also informed him at that time what other steps the company has taken to be a good member of the community. The company and I have hosted 3 annual training sessions for the Norfolk County DA's office as part of their annual alcohol awareness drive and tips training. They literally just completed a class within the last 2 or 3 weeks. I can't recall the date right offhand. We also have hosted 2 Foxborough High School senior graduation all-night parties in an event to prevent underage drinking on graduation night, and we are actively starting the planning of the third. Finally, all of my staff are required to attend semi-annual meetings. At that point, we always review alcohol awareness. So twice a year, they also receive a refresher in alcohol awareness. In addition to those points, we also schedule police officers on Friday and Saturday nights at the theater, in part to have a law enforcement presence available to make it known that the theater is a safe and inviting place to go, where activities such as underage drinking will not be tolerated or condoned. I hope you look at all the points I have just mentioned and understand the actions of the bartender that night do not reflect at all the mindset of the company. His actions are not in line with our expectations and should not be construed in any way of our corporate culture or our level of complacency that we allow or tolerate in any of our locations. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Norman. Peter?
So in brief, we are going to be accepting of the consequence and the decision that the board makes. I don't expect that the opinion of the board is going to change based on, I think it's reflective of Mr. DeVillis's comment in terms of consistency. At the same time, I caution the board that the incremental ratcheting that I mentioned and that is contemplated is real, and it's built in, and that doesn't change based on the composition of this board. And generally, I have only seen that ratcheting go one way. Does that make sense? I've only seen penalties get more severe. Mm-hmm. And I share, I think, in your frustration. It's surprising that there was this sheer number of notices of violation. Each one of them you as a board have to struggle with independently. And I ask myself, why this many? And part of it may be, there could be a number of different reasons, and I frankly don't know. I reread and went through the chief's order, and it looked very clear to me that all the guidelines were followed. Joe indicated that he received notice. The publication in the paper was there. It was very broad. It seemed to focus on the shoulder tap versus the actual compliance check within restaurants. And it was very early. So I think you're going to have some variety, and there will be various levels of compliance year to year. But ultimately, the frustration which I've heard from at least one board member, which was, we're tired of this, and I'm paraphrasing, this doesn't, the letter of reprimand doesn't seem to be working. I'm not sure if that's the case, and I'll leave that to you. But in this instance, you don't know if it's working if you've never gotten it. And I think that's the feeling that you're going to hear from some of these first time. So the point being, Joe won't be able to prove that it works if he never receives it. Does that make some sense? Mm-hmm. That if he doesn't have the opportunity to fix his problem, if you just slap a very onerous sanction on him, which has big economic consequences, and I know you're aware of that, and it depends on, this is an entertainment complex. There are cinemas, right? People pay a lot of money for a Lux level seat where there is some expectation. He's going to have to deal with that, and that's very difficult. And I don't expect you to have a ton of sympathy about that. At the same time, it is a real impact, and it's an impact that he has to deal with at a much larger level than a simple restaurant. So my point being, this board, whether it's comprised of you 5 or another 5 in a couple of years, may have to deal with a repeat violation. And I think it's fair to express frustration at those incidents. I think it's less justifiable to take out and react to a first-time incident. And that's my only point. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions or comments, anyone? Jim? John?
I'm all set.
David?
In your comments, you said underage drinking will not be condoned. Why now? Why not? Why wasn't that your stance before?
It's never been condoned. That was the point I was trying to make. I mean, we go through countless training sessions. Every 6 months we do the refresher. We have TIPS certifications for all of our staff. We don't tolerate it. I was simply trying to state with the police on site, hopefully underage people coming in look at that police officer as a deterrent and not put us in a situation where we would have to address a situation of underage drinking. It is not tolerated.
What's your average turnover for servers?
Actually, it's pretty low. I would say we maintain over half my staff for the server in my restaurants have been there since we've opened.
Okay. And to Mr. Tam, in my opinion, the most egregious offense is serving a minor. So you talk about levels of violations. In my opinion, that's the most egregious.
I'm not going to disagree with you. My opinion is that there are much more serious offenses. And I don't believe those are before you this evening. And if you haven't had to deal with them, I've been a bartender. I know that there are much more serious offenses than serving a minor. I take this seriously. I know the Chief O'Leary knows I take this seriously. I know the chair knows I take this seriously. This is an issue which is important to me. I have kids as well. At the same time, I disagree with you. You cannot say that over-service that leads to a horrendous accident is in some way less serious than serving a minor during a compliance check.
Well, you and I have a difference of opinion.
Well, but I don't disagree with you that it is a very serious issue.
You all set, David? Thank
All
you.
set.
Ginny?
Once again, there was no ID asked for. How crowded was the establishment on a Thursday night? Very crowded?
It was not crowded.
Not crowded at all.
No, it was not.
How would this bartender have handled a crowded weekend night? I mean, if when there's hardly anybody in the bar, a young man comes in, a very young-looking person comes in, and he doesn't even ask for ID, why? Why wouldn't he ask for ID? And you may not think that something like this is grievous, but it actually is. The town of Foxborough goes through a lot of time trying to do programs with the schools, trying to stop underage drinking. And it's so easy for a bartender just to say, let me see your ID. And that wasn't happened. This is the simplest thing you can do. And to tell you the truth, it doesn't take much training for someone to know that if they're serving alcohol to someone, that person should be 21 years of age.
And I don't disagree with you, and I want to make it clear in terms of my point about the word grievous in the regulations and having meaning and significance. I think the chair will acknowledge that in this instance, if you take the position that a first-time incident in a sting operation is grievous and therefore warrants a very punitive sanction, the most punitive sanction, then what do you do? There's a scale, ultimately. And I know this board is going to have to deal with some repeat incidents. Ultimately, if you start the floor at a very high scale, it's going to become very difficult for the board to deal with those ultimately that are most grievous. So I don't disagree with you or Mr. Feldman in terms of the seriousness of this. This is my personal opinion and not that of Joe or his organization. The reason why I brought it up is because I have that context over the past dozen years. I worked very hard with Ms. Brew and others in order to allow and facilitate the economic development that's occurred within town. the meals tax, the significant new tax revenue that comes with these restaurants. And yes, with it comes compliance checks and ultimately violations. It's a very difficult issue, and I don't disagree with any of this. What I'm saying is the board is going to have to struggle with this for years to come. And there are a number of licenses in town. I maintain they serve a very valuable benefit. I know you yourself agree with that in advocating for additional licenses to facilitate further economic development. And my only point is it needs to be a manageable process. And the frustration that this board feels, I think, is best directed at those that do not learn from past mistakes. That's my only point. We're going to be accepting of the consequences that you ultimately deem necessary.
But just to let everyone know, the rules and regulations do provide for the remedies for a second offense and a third offense, and they do go up.
Yes,
So-
and we worked very carefully on those.
Right, so we will have no problem, if someone does a second offense, believe me, we will have no problem meting out what we feel is proper for a second violation, or third violation, or a fourth violation. Right now, we're dealing with the first violation, but we're prepared to deal with the second, the third, and the fourth. It's right here. It's right here for us to read, and it's right here for the licensee to read. And I suggest that you go back and read the regulations. They're there for a
I
reason.
know them quite well, Ms. Capola.
Oh, good.
So, point of clarification, there are, Ms. Capola says, first violation, second violation, and third violation, but nowhere in those first, second, and third does it talk about grievous. The reason, the place that grievous comes in, it says, if the board finds at its hearing that the license holder's actions were grievous, the board may add an additional violation to this. So if it wasn't grievous,
You know, we're still within our.
we're still within our bounds.
That's
If
right.
we feel that it's grievous, we're within our bounds, plus we can add something. So I don't want the board to say, you know, we can't do this because it's not grievous, or we're the grievous. Grievousness is above and beyond these regulations. So the first violation plus if it's grievous.
Right.
So unless I'm reading this wrong, I do understand the regulations.
They
And you're
are,
saying,
they're
you know,
guidelines. And as when the discussion, the reason why I agree with you, Mr. DeVos, I do. Grievousness enters into and can be a factor, a plus factor for this board. And that was the understanding. It's written a little awkwardly in the paragraph following the violations. My only point, Ms. Capola, is that ultimately it becomes very, very burdensome on someone that hasn't learned a lesson. And that's intentional. And I don't dispute anything that you said. But ultimately, these are all, I think you, having heard from Joe, you know how seriously he takes this. We're going to be accepting of the consequence. I fully expect that it will be consistent with the other violations. And I know that this board has acknowledged that they're changing their perspective on these first-time incidents, and that in fact, there will be no more letters of reprimand for a first-time instance as long as this board is of this consensus.
Well, just, first of all, we'll also be sending a letter of reprimand in addition to the suspension. But also, just to let you know, we take this, I know, Joe, I'm sorry,
Right.
is taking this very seriously. But we're taking it very seriously, too. That's our job. We're elected to do that. And that's what we're taking this very seriously.
Thanks, Ginny. I just had a couple of final questions. Again, in terms of the actions that were taken, corrective actions. Did you have any discussion about carding all customers who come in?
Yes, I'm glad you asked that question. The originally, through our TIPS training, we were advised to train anybody under the age of 40 or who didn't have lines in their face. At our Lux level, we card everyone who goes upstairs to our Lux level restaurant. We have since implemented that policy at the studio as well. So everyone who purchases a drink at Patriot Place Cinemas now gets carded.
So all
Everyone.
customers, okay. And, again, would you be open to, discussing perhaps working with the chief on coming up with a process for self-compliance checks?
I am open to anything
Okay.
that will help me better manage liquor service,
Okay,
to include working with the chief, yes.
thank you.
Yes.
Okay, so, any other comments from the board? I'll make the motion. I move that we have a finding of fact that the employee of Studio 3 Restaurant Showcase Cinema Deluxe served alcohol to minor as outlined in the letter to the Board of Selectmen dated October 20th, 2014, and the testimony given. And we accept the findings of the letter and testimony as presented.
I'll second that.
Any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, the next hearing is public hearing for Tavolino. Ginny, could you read the notice, please?
Legal notice. Notice is hereby given that the Board of Selectmen will conduct a public hearing on Wednesday, November 19, 2014, at 8:30 p.m. in the Foxborough High School Media Center, 120 South Street, Foxborough, Mass., pursuant to its licensing authority in accordance with Massachusetts General Laws annotated, Chapter 138, Sections 23, 64, and 67, and all amendments thereto. The purpose of the hearing will be to review and discuss information concerning alleged violations of Chapter 138 that occurred at the Tavolino, 274 Patriot Place, Foxborough, Mass. All interested parties are invited to attend. And this was noted, it was 8:30.
Yes, so do we have agreement from the license holder that we can go forward earlier than?
Yes.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Anyone testifying in this hearing, please raise your right hand. The testimony you're about to give, you swear to do the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
We'll begin with Officer Noonan, Sergeant Noonan again.
Thank you.
Sir, would you give your name and your assignment, please?
Sergeant Richard Noonan of the Foxborough Police Department.
And were you engaged in a compliance check operation in September of 2014?
I was. On September 25th, 2014, under the direction of Chief O'Leary, I conducted an alcohol compliance check of all the licensed establishments in the town of Foxborough.
And did you have occasion to visit Tavolino at 274 Patriot Place?
I did.
Can you describe the premises?
Tavolino's is a restaurant that provides liquor service and also has a bar area within this restaurant area.
And approximately how big is the premises?
It's a pretty good-sized restaurant. The bar's semicircular with seats around the bar inside and outside.
And did you have an operative with you that night?
I did.
And can you describe to the board how the operation commenced?
Prior to commencing the compliance check, we reviewed the department's policy and procedure on conducting a compliance check with identification. The underage operative was explained in detail what was expected of him, and also the undercover police officer with him was also explained what to do.
And how did this operation commence then?
At approximately 6:18, the underage operative entered Tavolino's and made his way to the bar. Upon speaking to the bartender asked what he would like to drink. He responded that he would like a Bud Light bottle, at which time the bartender proceeded to serve him a Bud Light bottle.
And where were you located during this operation?
I was out in the General Plaza area.
And was there an additional officer present inside the premises?
There was.
And was there information gained from speaking with that officer?
Yes, he observed the underage operative to be in possession of a alcoholic beverage, a Bud Light bottle.
And was the underage patron asked or requested to produce identification, if you know?
According to the underage operative, at no time was he asked to request produce his identification.
Following the service of the alcohol to the operative, was there then payment made for the beverage?
There was. He asked the bartender after being served the Bud Light bottle if he could cash out, at which time the waitress presented him with a receipt, at which time he made payment, received change, and then left the establishment.
I have no further questions for Officer Sergeant Noonan.
Thank you. Attorneys, please.
Okay, we have no counsel. We are not attorneys. My name is Graham
Okay,
Silliman.
sorry.
I'm the owner of Tavolino. Tom Peruna here is the manager of record. We work very closely in the operation and management of the restaurant. If you go back to when we were first licensed, we didn't retain counsel then either. We're a very small operation, even though it's a big restaurant. I mean, it's just us. So we'll be presenting basically the facts that we can add to the record. To start with, we do not dispute any of that presentation. And we would apologize to the selectmen. We don't want to be taking your time doing this tonight, and we're very sorry. And it is our intention to spare you from ever having to talk to us at any other hearing like this in the future. And we're taking steps to make sure that that happens. We would want to do better than that. And in fact, the fact that we didn't was kind of a wake-up call for us. And so we're going to outline at this point some of the steps that we took. They include some lasting changes in our operation, not just we sent this person for training right now. And so just in a larger sense, we did step back. We looked at our own policies and procedures. We did review Foxborough's rules and regulations, and we looked outside also for some advice and feedback. We met or spoke with outside parties, including an ABCC investigator, Nick Bellis, a risk manager from our insurance company, Mike Marcantonio, Chief Paul McDonald in the Town of Barnstable Police Department. The Hyannis Main Street there is managed as kind of a hospitality district. And so that as a hospitality zone, we looked at that. And later in the process, we also reviewed our plans for incident reporting, internal compliance checks, and training with Chief O'Leary. And just to quickly run through some of the steps that we decided to take at that point, Tom's going to go over that.
Good evening. Again, I would like to apologize for taking up time tonight, and this is embarrassing for us to even have to be here to do this, but it happened and we have to move forward. Just to give a little history, I've been the general manager of the restaurant for 5.5 years, been employed by Tavolino and Better Food for 6 years. This is our first violation also. And we've been a good community leader in our restaurant for both alcohol service and just to the community. And we take great pride in having a business in Foxborough and want to continue that. So some of the steps that I'm going to go over are steps that we've done in the past and some we revised and improved going forward so this does not happen again. I would think the biggest thing is more of a cultural thing that we're doing in the restaurant to get our staff to be more vigilant in the service of alcohol and understand even more how important every drink that we serve is. Every guest that comes in, whether it's over-serving somebody, not over-serving somebody, or serving a minor. So one, we established a culture of vigilance towards responsible alcohol service. We have all managers, all servers and bartenders have all completed TIPS, and we are 100% in compliance with TIPS or Serve Safe certification right now. We set up an in-house training for all our staff, so that included busboys, food runners, hosts, and kitchen staff that I conducted personally with every employee over the last couple of weeks. And that was because prior to,
Thank you.
Besides our servers and bartenders being the one serving alcohol, a host greets people at the front door, could observe behavioral cues that might set them off, that they could go to a manager, a bartender, a server to say something. We have an open kitchen. A customer could walk into the kitchen and get lost on their way to the bathroom or the front door. So that's why we have trained every employee in the restaurant in our in-house training. We did review, as Graham mentioned, our alcohol policy, and we've made some changes to it. We've implemented an alcohol incident report log that was recommended to me from Mike Marcantone, and we are checking every day in the log. The closing manager is responsible to sign their name and say, we had no alcohol incidences tonight, or if we did have one, we would log it, refuse service to guest sitting at table 92 had an expired license, was underage, or if we had an incident where we've observed bad behavior in a person that could assume they had too much to drink, and we decide to shut somebody off, we're logging that. So that'll be done on a daily basis. We have current 2014 ID check-in books available to the staff. Graham and myself met a couple weeks ago with Chief O'Leary to have him review what we have done in the past and what we were doing going forward, and to seek his advice and recommendations on what we were doing. I did hire Mike Marcantonio also. He did come to Tavolino and ran a private tip certification for all of management and staff that needed to be retrained. I personally have reviewed the Foxborough rules and regulations for alcohol service and shared that with our serving staff. And on a daily basis, we've always do pre-shift meetings at the restaurant, and we will include the proper and responsible training of alcohol service at the pre-shift meals. We also participate in the designated driver program at Patriot Place, and internally we also always offer complimentary and refillable soft drinks to anybody who tells us there are a designated driver. So that's what we've done to improve our alcohol service at the restaurant right now.
Just to add a few things to that. So we mentioned that this was kind of a wake-up call, and we wanted to change some of our policies. Honestly, we thought we were a good operation before then, and so this was a hard thing at first for us to approach, because we're sitting, what else do we do? And in talking with some very savvy people and knowledgeable people who have dealt with this from different angles, whether it's a police department or a risk manager from the insurance company, the one thing that we kept coming back to is, and we still think this is a vulnerability and we need to work on this, is there is a one-on-one interaction that can happen over and over and over constantly all day long, and it happens so constantly and so rapidly, you can't come up with a system that monitors it every single time. For like, I can't be the owner and watch every single one. We have to instead develop some sort of arrangement that makes sure that these one-on-one interactions occur in the best possible way. And again, that gets to, this isn't just wordsmithing, but everything we got, including from Mike Marcantonio, it was all about rules compliance. And we were trying to get past that to being more of a culture where everyone has the right mindset and you're just vigilant. You're on your toes. One of the issues that came up that night, we haven't addressed what happened to Amy, the bartender. She was suspended immediately. And remember, this was a wake-up call. This is something we had to investigate. We say, and in fact, the initial reaction of the manager on duty was she's going to be terminated. We feel that we as a restaurant operator have some responsibility there. We don't necessarily have the best data on what to do to a particular employee based on a single incident, because it actually isn't just based on a single incident. Her employment file, she's worked more than 1,300 shifts at the restaurant since she was hired. She has an exemplary record, including some documented instances when she's done the right thing in the right way in sticky situations. All right, so she's not just been someone who's been around and we're just fond of this person. She was a good employee. We used her to train other people, and of all people to fail, it can happen to anybody. So what do we do? Are we just sitting ducks? So it was a very, very hard question with us, and so we felt like we had to make everybody more aware and on their toes, and we had to figure out ways to get to that. We actually restructured some of the bartenders' job. You guys have asked a lot of questions tonight focusing on, well, it wasn't a busy night, was it? We would tell you that in our own risk analysis of our operations, a busy night is one of the safest possible nights. When there is a game night, we don't have to tell everyone to be on their toes. They already are. When it's a busy night, instead of one bartender on the bar, there are 3 bartenders on the bar, and they divide their jobs. We have special teams, like NFL special teams. Everybody does a different thing. Someone's just doing service bar. On a quieter night, you're jack of all trades. Oh, and there might be a late delivery. And the POS computer system is kind of buggy, and it's not working, and every one of your orders to the kitchen is coming in wrong, okay? And you're by yourself. Also, on a busier night, we have food runners. So when at our particular restaurant, almost all of our orders, even at the bar, come with food. It's not just a drinking place. So it gets more complicated when you don't have a food runner. You have to leave the bar and go retrieve the food. So I would just a point put out there, and it was one element of what we were talking about in terms of we need to streamline the bartender's job to cut down on distractions and simultaneous multiple demands on attention. That was pointed out to us by our risk manager. Okay, believe it or not, on what appears to the bystander as being a quieter night could be a more hectic shift for that bartender compared to a busy night with 3 bartenders, food runners, extra hosts, and 2 managers. Okay, just a thought there. And a final thing about the incident report log that Tom talked about. Beyond reviewing and managing specific cases, the managers look together at the full book once a week. So besides a case-by-case thing, we look for trends. And at our Saturday pre-meal meeting, that's a special one where we do go over things that we've looked at from the past week. Again, we're trying to, instead of just saying look at every ID, or instead of just saying at every shift meeting, okay, everybody, be aware of alcohol service, we're trying to be very specific and bring up specific instances like this is the type of thing that could happen. You say to a cook who says, what do I have to do with alcohol service? You say, well, it was really funny when that guy stumbled into the kitchen, wasn't it? Well, would you, instead of just saying that was funny and laughing together, get out there and alert a manager that there's something going on with this guy and he's headed to that table? Okay, that's the culture of vigilance. Okay, overall, again, we want to go beyond following a list of rules because we're very worried about that one-on-one interaction. We thought we had a good operation before, and we fell down here. Okay, I would also point out that we've passed every other compliance check, and there have been others. Okay, at this point, understanding how this hearing is going, I understand that we're not going to have a chance to speak at the hearing again, so I will briefly express what has emerged as the pattern that everyone is bringing up in the Selectmen's decision at each of these hearings. From the January 17th letter from Chief O'Leary that was in the hearing packet, we point to what has been our relationship with the town in managing our operation. As the chief said, we look forward to continuing our partnership to prevent underage drinking in the town of Foxborough. Even outside of what happens here, we've already continued that with the chief after our very embarrassing incident. This was a serious violation. We're taking it seriously, and we do work with the police department. I want to address that there is a concern that 9 failed on one night. We are not part of any group of 9. Tonight, here, you're addressing a single licensee, not the Patriot Place liquor licenses, not the Route 1 restaurants, not the craft group. It's us. Okay? And it's always been us. This was the licensee before there was a violation, and this still is the licensee now. We're not all here. We have one manager at the restaurant right now because we're open. Okay? In thinking, just to give you some perspective, I feel I have an obligation to do this because we're very concerned about the position being taken by the Selectmen in terms of how we operate in the town in the long term. I will share with you a conversation we had with the town of Barnstable. I initiated this because I have connections on Cape Cod, and I saw this in the newspaper that they did a compliance check, and they had 1 failure out of 50. And so I called Chief McDonald and I asked, how did you do that? And his answer was, well, this was a very good year. Don't think it's always been that way. They did have 14 failures 2 years ago. I will tell you that there are a lot of ways of managing the relationship with your licensees, and you can work with them a lot of different ways. It just doesn't have to be one lever that's pulled called the punishment lever. It has been noted that, to quote, we've given out a lot of letters of reprimand. And on that basis, I'm actually on the side that a suspension is warranted. As selectmen, you do have a right to be frustrated. However, if your point is, quote, we've given out a lot of letters of reprimand, that is relevant to our case here tonight, we would respectfully disagree. We have never, ever appeared before you previous to this episode. and there have been compliance checks in the past, and we have been involved in them. We have never appeared before you. We are unhappy about our performance in the latest compliance check. We have been subject to them before. The results are a matter of public record. In preparing the record and thinking about this, you can say that there were 9 failures on one day. I would argue with you that it's equally valid to state that a licensee has had X number of compliance checks, passes, and that could have a valid place in the record that you consider, but it was not added. Here is some, in addition, outside of compliance checks, I'll present some hard data about our everyday performance. Tavolino has served more than 500,000 alcoholic beverages without one violation, okay, before we had the compliance check. If any of you work in the healthcare field or you're in manufacturing, that is better than 6 Sigma quality. Amy, the specific bartender in question, worked more than 1,300 shifts without a violation, and I won't go into details here, but she did have a documented record of taking correct and appropriate actions in other situations. Again, getting back to Amy, I will also address, because you've expressed concerns about the actual service person. Don't think there wasn't considerable debate about what to do with this bartender. What settled it for us was this. This has happened. We need to operate going forward. And we kept on returning to the fact that this one-on-one interaction that happens constantly over and over is where we are really most vulnerable. We can do all kinds of planning and structural changes and operational changes, but there are going to be individual employees where we can't hear what they're saying in front of a customer taking an order, and we can't micromanage that all the time. As this was, besides all the other information about our past record, the point was made that of all the employees we have now, we can point to one who is the least likely to ever make this mistake. If we had terminated this employee, we would be facing with hiring somebody else or putting them in the position, and that would be an unknown person. We, of course, would train them, tell them about all our policies, and we would be dealing with a bit of a wild card there. We were very unhappy, and Amy did suffer some consequences, and she had to attend retraining. She had to, beyond that, there was some very deep discussion about how we operate. And again, we also took some responsibility ourselves. We realized that some of the situation that we put an employee in operationally make it harder for them to do their job really well. And we're not just going to parrot a policy and then throw them out if something goes wrong. Okay, so we had some things that we had to change as well. But I want you to know that it was taken very seriously. Addressing that about the bartenders, it's also been said that looking at criminal prosecution is a better way for the board to send a message. Let me just suggest to you that this is how it can really play out. In our analysis, the best employee we can get is a smart, ethical professional with great people skills. We think it's in the town's interests also to be aligned with ours in looking for people like that. Unfortunately, people like that are in high demand and can pick their jobs. Yesterday alone on the local Craigslist, there were 24 new hospitality jobs posted in one day. So here's how it plays out. You call these people criminals, but Foxborough is not an island. If a server or bartender looks at the jobs on Craigslist and they see us hiring, well, Foxborough has made it clear that it is a town that will pursue criminal prosecutions if they ever make a mistake in their job. That good person looking for a job is going to go work at Legacy Place. We will get the leftovers. Okay? I just position to you that you need to think about the totality of your actions. And we understand your role. There are a lot of levers that you can pull. There are a lot of things that you can do to ensure compliance. You can reach beyond the license holder to individual employees. But remember, we want to keep the best possible people, and we think that is in your interest as well. We're willing to work with you to figure out how to do that, and we understand your issue that you stand before the people of Foxborough and have to say to them, oh no, we're watching out for the town. We get that. All right. There may be a lot of ways to do this. If you look at the original recommendations that we understand from the outside counsel, Mr. Keegan and Chief O'Leary, these were consistent with previous decisions, okay? Even if you say that the punishment contemplated is within the guidelines developed by the town, and we did participate in those, we agree that they're within the guidelines. But we would further observe that the punishment is really at the far extreme end of the spectrum and has already additional stipulations added in terms of timing and specific dates. So understand that part of our questioning, maybe not before you tonight, but it is something that we would inevitably have to ask is this the worst offense that can be contemplated? Because that's where your position is landing. Again, looking at the risk management exposure that we have with people we've talked to, honestly, there are worse things that can be contemplated than tonight. I'm not saying that to make light of it, but we challenged people who advise us, okay? We could serve someone to the point that they're intoxicated. We could let them go out and drive a car and get into an accident. Like, there's an easy one, an obvious one. But there are worse scenarios in which we could horribly be called before you. Okay, that's not to say that what we didn't do was bad, but just to tell you, yes, we agree that what we did was wrong and that it was a violation, and it's the worst possible thing that you could contemplate, to serve a minor. Okay, and then you could serve minors in worse ways than even that, though. Okay, it is possible. And again, in terms of thinking about, as a practical matter, how do we run the restaurant going forward, we actually had to contemplate that and develop scenarios for all of the worst possible things that could happen. All right, we're doing that to protect ourselves, to protect the town, to protect our guests, to protect our employees. Okay. So anyway, the final thing to say is, we can understand the pressures you're under. We can understand how upset you are. You have a range of options. All right. We will say that, with complete respect to you and with full intentions of working for a very long time with the town and with the chief, collaboratively, to be the best corporate citizen that we can be in the town, we may appeal this. We say that with heavy hearts. There's no lawyer here. Nobody here is from the corporate office with time to work on this. We all run the restaurant every day. So we don't have much time to do this. It's very costly to us, and we ask you to please be aware of that. And it's not just costly to us. It is something that, according to the state, we will be required to prepare an appeal jointly with the town, and that would be with your counsel. So we will be working with them. All of our time will be matched by the town's retained counsel. We do believe that we will be able to prepare an appeal that will contain 100% facts that both parties will agree on. I won't go into details because I don't think you want to spend the time on that, but you can always ask your outside counsel about this process. All of this is costly time that could be spent on other things and other ways that could contribute to a productive partnership, to quote the chief, between us and the town, or even better, possibly between all license holders and the town. When the town reviewed and rewrote the rules for license holders a few years ago, we were at the meetings and we contributed with comments. We are an active partner at every possible level to make things go well. And I have a last question, since we won't have a chance to speak, and a request for a response on an administrative matter, because this can only be decided by the selectmen under the way things work in Massachusetts. Should we file an appeal, remember that in its preparation, the state requires the town and the licensee to work collaboratively. We would ask that the town be willing to hold the license suspensions in abeyance until an appeal could be completed following the state procedures. That's all we have to say.
Thank you. Any additional questions, comments?
I just have a question. Sergeant Noonan, all the alleged liquor violations that we've had in this series of, we're having 3 nights of hearings, were they all as a result of the sting? They were all a result of the sting?
Correct.
Right? Okay. Do you ever have, have you ever found underage, the sale of liquor to a minor, not during a sting? In other words,
Not at this establishment,
okay,
no.
so in other words, the only way that you can establish that an establishment is selling liquor to a minor is through a sting.
We do reverse things as well, which will go into establishment and look for youthful people that are consuming alcohol and ask for their identifications. We have done that in the past.
Okay, okay, but that does not result in any violations against the establishment.
It would.
It would.
It would, okay.
Yes.
Would they come before us?
They have, yes.
Okay, okay. Not this year. We haven't had any this year.
Correct.
Right, okay. So we had the stings at 29 establishments, and 9 of them failed. And they failed because there was a sting. So my question is, what happens on the other nights when you don't conduct a sting? A Monday, a Tuesday, a Wednesday, a Thursday, a Friday, a Saturday? There's possibly liquor is being sold to minors, possibly, and you just haven't caught them,
Correct.
okay? My concern is the town of Foxborough, who has a lot of establishments. I don't want the town of Foxborough to become a mecca of underage drinking because we conduct a sting maybe once a year. And underage, under 21 people think that they can come to Foxborough, and word gets around pretty quickly which establishments you can go to because they're lax. That's what we're trying to avoid. We want to make sure that these establishments in Foxborough who are licensed by us are not lax. And that's the whole purpose of these hearings. That's the whole purpose of the disciplinary, what we do for discipline. And that's what we do. And what bothers me is because we conduct the stings, that's when we find the violations. What happens when we don't conduct a sting? Are these violations going on anyway? That's the problem, and that's what we're trying to avoid.
We had considerable debate about this, saying, we got caught, was this going on all over the place? That's why we've changed some of our procedures to make sure that that's not the case. We have met with the chief, and we're working on trying to make internal compliance checks work. They're harder than you think if you want to make them go well. Because the one thing we can't do is use an underage operative. We have to be a little creative. We've already started to do it, but our policy, and we've tightened it up with our own employees, is we're never going to get caught, because if you're somebody who's doing this, you're going to be out of the building before the police show up. We're going to catch you. All right. I mean, that's basically what we want to do with internal compliance. As far as disciplining, I would also suggest that, again, you said your role here is discipline. Your role is a lot of things. I mean, we have worked with the police department. We're going to continue to work with the police department. The other thing, and then the other point is, this may be too subtle a point, but it's really valid. There are things that you can do that make you less of a target. We have shot glasses at our bar. They're used for measuring. They're not used for serving. You can't be served a drink in a shot glass. You cannot get a Red Bull and vodka at our bar. You cannot order Jägermeister at our bar. So we've done things that are kind of structural in the design of what we offer that say, you know, if you're really young, you might want to go somewhere else. And those are choices we can make. I mean, we do get orders for each of those things from time to time, not a lot of them, and we forego that business. And that is a message to people that this isn't the kind of place you want to go to.
All you have to do is ask a person who looks young for their ID.
Mm-hmm.
That's all you have to do.
Correct.
That's all we're asking these establishments to do, is to follow the law of the state of Massachusetts and the regulations of the town of Foxborough. That's all. If you do that, you're not going to be coming before this board.
Right.
That's all we're asking.
Mhm.
And we hope it doesn't fall on deaf ears, and I think it's not going to fall on deaf ears. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Actually, a comment, first of all, thank you for speaking so eloquently on this, and the fact that you came here with a lot of research, the owner of the establishment, and obviously spent a lot of time thinking about this. It means a lot to, I think, the business, and I think some businesses could take note of that. I'm surprised that you said that you were not going to fire the bartender, and having heard why, I may not necessarily disagree with that. I think you make a good point, and I think if I was hiring somebody and they did that and there was a good employee and they understood the ramifications and I kept that employee, you're probably right. Chances are they're not going to do it again, so I'm learning a little bit as well. And I appreciate you reached out, and I believe I think you did do that. You reached out to the different towns and the different, and you had that dialogue, so that's helpful. You kind of lost me on the appeal part, and I was hoping we wouldn't have to even talk about that in the dialogue, but it's a fact and something we all have to
It's
consider.
the only time I can speak, so I have to do it then.
Understood. Last week, if someone had said, if they're going to appeal, I said, let them, because I haven't gone through that process, and maybe we're doing something wrong, and it's a learning experience, and I don't necessarily wouldn't want to go through that. If we're doing something wrong and we're being egregious, then, so be it. We'll find out that way. But I think of all the people that I've listened to in the last few years, I think you make the most sense, and I appreciate the work that you did and the candidness that you have on that. So it'll be an interesting discussion, but I just want to let you know that I do appreciate the work that you did. I do go into restaurants in Foxborough, and I was in Tavolino's last week with 2 other couples, because I want to see how it operates. My kids go to the cinemas, and we try to visit as much as we can, and it was a good experience. And the kids in the last hearing before this, they go into the cinemas, and you guys are good business people, and they're good in the you're good in the community, and I've been involved in some of the charities that you and the others have done. I look at this as a tool that it's a learning, and is it a stick and a carrot, or is it people get in trouble, or the worse we get, they're going to listen or back away? I don't know, but I can tell you with the discussions that we've had, people are listening, and maybe all that stuff. And I think Ginny's got the point. All the training in the world is great. Just ask for the ID. It didn't happen. I think we're in our rights to get angry about it and forget about the other 8. Look at you and say, this 3-day or 2-day or whatever we come is relevant to that. So, the appeal thing aside, I'm confident in my understanding and my reasoning how I got to that point. But I think it's important that the businesses come here and speak candidly. And if we can learn from you and you can learn from us, I think it's a lot better moving, down the road. So I'm long-winded sometimes, but thank you for speaking the way that you did.
John, any comments?
I'm all set, thanks.
Yeah, I think some of the board's frustration is we're calling the licensees to task here. I think our frustration is, how do we get the employees to buy in? And I think that's where the struggle is, because ultimately it's the employees that are making the mistakes. And, I don't know what the answer is. I do know that when you leave a decision up to an employee who is going 100 miles an hour, about whether this person is, here you're saying, appears to be under 35, doesn't have wrinkles. What does that mean? It's up to interpretation. The fact is, if everybody was carded, we wouldn't be sitting here today. So, you can have all the training that you want, but you got to get the employees to buy in, and the simplest thing is just card everybody.
Well, there are a couple things about that. First of all, in the instance of this sting, you wouldn't have needed to card them. All you would need to say is, how old are you? Okay, if you really want to rub it in. The second point is, in understanding the psychology of what it means to work day in and day out, and we have a lot of employees who stick with us for a long time, if you make an employee card everybody, including my 92-year-old father, the employee is going to lose respect for the vigilance process. I am being forced to go through, and like we looked into this very carefully, like what are the things, and we knew that, for example, that's an easy thing for us to declare as a policy, and chances are the selectmen are going to like that, okay? It doesn't work because the employee is going to lose respect for that process, saying, oh, here I go, I'm asking an obvious 92-year-old guy for an ID. Don't I feel like an idiot? It is something that's done very frequently in large corporate operations. Any of the airport bars run by Marriott, for example, okay, and it's very clear that the management of that operation is 1,000 miles away and just has no clue what's going on in our bar here today, okay? And it's, again, if you want your people to be vigilant and they get the sense that the management is vigilant as well, we tread a fine line. It would be very satisfying to put the hammer down and say, nope, you're just going to do this all the time. That's our answer, because now I know everyone's being carded. Okay, at a particular level, that's very satisfying, and there was debate about that kind of thing. But we've decided to step away from that. What we want is a thinking, ethical, savvy professional with great people skills. And if you have that kind of a person, you don't want to have them carry out mindless policies. You want to turn them into thinking people. Because again, our biggest vulnerability is little small transactions that happen all the time that we can't watch every second. But and I say that because there was a lot of debate about that kind of an idea.
So what's the answer? I think that's what this board is reaching out to the business owners.
Yeah.
What is the
Well,
answer?
I think I'd like to speak to being in a restaurant at least 5 days a week. I think the answer is to talk to your employees every single day, share the importance of it, and I will tell you, our employees know the importance of it right now. And I think they knew it pretty well before, but that's all we've talked about for a month now. Every single day, at every pre-meal, it's posted in the back of the house. There's signs, the date that you have to check that was given to us by our Budweiser distributors, hung up in the wait stations. It will just be part of our language constantly going forward. I will tell you, every front of the house staff member who serves alcohol 100% understands the importance and what the consequences are going to be in our restaurant, because they're going to be more severe going forward also. So we take it as serious as you do. We love the restaurant business, work hard at it, and we want to be not in front of you again. I mean, it's our daily job to do that, and it'll be my responsibility to make sure every employee in that restaurant knows what they have to do.
One interesting thing that we've observed that I think is probably a good thing is it's not just top down. When you now hear one employee telling another employee, or you hear a new employee being trained and they're sitting there learning how to use the computer, and they say, oh yeah, by the way, so that you rang in drinks, this is the way we talk about, we think about how you have to handle alcohol service. They all got it in the training booklets, okay? But when it's one employee to another, again, it's one of those unguarded one-on-one transactions. That's a positive reinforcement, not a risk of a one-on-one transaction, okay? That wasn't a service, but that was one employee at the same level talking to another employee. We think that that's a positive development. When, again, we're trying to say, we're not just trying to hit everyone over the head with rules that have to be complied with. We want to change the culture of the business. When they talk to each other at the same level, one-on-one, in the right way, that was a little bit of progress.
So that's what's happening now.
We've seen it a few times.
Mm-hmm.
We like it. We've thought, you know what, that's one of the benefits. And I also have to tell you, it's never going to be perfect. You're never going to have a Patriots game with 0 protective custodies. But that doesn't mean we're not going to we don't throw up our arms and give up. And we chip away at it. We try and be creative about it. One of the big lessons we learned recently, if you really want to get good at this, you want to get beyond rules creating, is you got to think of scenarios, like you're writing little TV dramas or something. Okay, a guy walks into the kitchen, stumbling around. What do you do about that? Okay, this is why the cooks get involved. Okay, you think of things that could really happen. You're the host, and the other host takes off trying to get a table for customers who are waiting, and you hear someone say, "Look, you just stand between the two of us, and we're going to order for you." Oh, okay. The host isn't a serving person. Now we're telling that person, go alert somebody about that table. Okay. It's just one more step. We're trying to think of more things we can do, and that, I think, was the most interesting advice we got. And that kind of infuses every other thing we're thinking through. Are we doing enough? Are we putting our attention in the right places?
But the absolutely simplest thing you can do is when a young person comes up
Right.
to the bar and asks for a Bud Light, you say, "Can I have your ID?"
You're right. That's the result. Like we're not gonna blow that, are we, people? Because we talk about that a lot. Like, don't blow the simple things. It's the complicated, nuanced issues that we should be good enough that we're worrying about.
But the
now.
problem is, the simplest thing was the one that was blown, and
Absolutely.
that's what we're trying to prevent.
Well, that's why we called that a wake-up call.
Actually, my observation is, and I like your term, culture of vigilance. And you made a lot of good points on how you're going to create that. But you've been in business for a while, and what we're trying to wrestle with is, did 9 individual establishments have a moment of complacency, or is it a culture of complacency? And the thing is, we're treating you individually, but how did you go from a long, 5 years or more in business?
12, actually, if you count.
12, okay,
Yeah.
to complacency.
A lot of it was, okay, here's the flip side of, we don't serve Jägermeister, we don't have shots. When we sell wine, it's wine by the bottle. That's not what kids want, okay? We're not a tavern. Most of our liquor sales go with food. Some of it is we've focused so much on being structurally the right kind of place. We put all those things in place. What the wake-up call for us was, the real vulnerability isn't in all that stuff. We've made it very rare to get the underage drinker. We don't have many police calls. We don't ever feel like we have much of a call to have a detail at the restaurant. I guess you could call it complacency, but what the wake-up call for us was, no matter what you do with all those things, the real vulnerability, and this is scary, and I will tell you that this is going to be the same for every other license holder. It all boils down to this, wherever they're coming from, whatever kind of tavern they are or whatever. There is a one-on-one transaction between two individuals that you can't monitor every time. I remember looking at the thing that the stadium did, where they had a renegade employee who wanted to serve 2 young women who were clearly underage, and he wanted to impress them. Like, they had 20 cameras on that guy. That's not going to happen with us. We need to think differently about what goes on in the real world to make sure the right thing gets done the right way. And I'm going to tell you right now, that is our biggest vulnerability, and it's just going to be something that we're going to be creatively thinking about. It's one of those issues of vigilance, and I'm not going to be able to say we're ever going to be perfect about it, but we're aiming to never run into trouble. We want to stay ahead of it a couple of steps and have layers of way of staying ahead of it, so we don't go near having that kind of a problem. It's the best answer I can give, because there's not a perfect answer.
I would like to make one other point, because it's a surprise to me, and I'm sure to Graham too, but there's about 10 to 13 of our employees in the audience tonight that we did not know were going to be here. So I think also that does show our staff is taking this serious. I mean, we didn't ask anybody to come to this hearing tonight, but I see a lot of people in the audience for our support, I guess. So I think that's a good representation of our staff too, that they obviously are taking it serious for that many people to show up tonight. So we 100% will take it serious.
I'd just like to make a comment before we move on. Having worked on the liquor license regs a couple of years ago with all the business owners and Chief O'Leary and Dave Brown from the community, who has experience as a risk in that area, was really an education for me. And one of the things, Chief O'Leary really was ahead of the time. A couple of years back, he was talking about hospitality zones at that very time that we were reviewing these regulations. And as part of our presentation, we actually used that term and talked about how really the way for to manage that type of development is really for the community to become more of a resource to the businesses as opposed to a punitive source for the businesses. And in hindsight, I feel that, we've maybe fallen down on that job because I think I'd like us to go back and relook at that approach that we had discussed a couple of years back and, revitalize that concept, work with, I'd like to see the board work with Chief O'Leary to really move forward and take that concept to the next level because it hasn't gone there. And I think what you've done in terms of your research and what you reached out to, it just speaks volumes as to what was really what Chief O'Leary was talking about at the time. So, I really appreciate that you've done this. It's been a good wake-up call to me, having worked on those regs in the past. And, again, I know how frustrated we are. Everyone knows how frustrated we are. But I think hearing this presentation takes me back to our responsibility also, that we're partners in this too, and we have to be willing to work to prevent this from happening in a constructive way. So I just want to thank you again for your research and for reminding me of how we started this all out a couple of years back. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, I'm going to make a motion here, if everyone is all set.
Yep.
Thank you. I move that we have finding of fact that the employee of Better Foods Foxborough LLC, doing business as Tavolino, served alcohol to a minor as outlined in the letter to the Town of Foxborough Board of Selectmen dated October 20th, 2014, and in the testimony, we accept the findings of the letter and testimony as presented.
I'll second that.
Any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, David, so the next steps, should we be,
Well, you've taken all three of the hearings under advisement. Now is your opportunity to discuss as a group how it is you would dispose of each of those license matters. And you should, address each one of them as each are entitled to disposition of their own matter. We do have the matters from a week ago where you did make a decision relative to those, and we'll revisit the actual days that had been suggested from last week for those that were heard last week. But obviously, you have that matter for those that you heard tonight, how it is that you would act as to those. So with that, you can certainly commence with your deliberations on the matter.
okay, so the first business is Saga Hibachi Steakhouse. Ginny, do you want to start comments?
Just a comment?
Or your thoughts on what type of sanctions should be levied?
Well, I am in favor of what we did the last hearing, a letter of reprimand and 3-day suspension with 3 days. They can choose their days, but one of those days has to be on a Friday or a Saturday. That was what we had decided. I believe that's the complete, is it?
Mm-hmm. Right. One weekend day and 2 other days.
One weekend being Friday or Saturday. That's on.
And to be completed prior to January 31st. David?
I agree.
Okay. John?
Going back to sort of the fundamentals of all three of these, where a bartender, waiter, or waitress fails to ask for identification from someone so young, I mean, asking for identification to a bartender should be as normal as breathing. And, you know, this to me, and I use the word complacent, but I have seen, you know, you can call it a trend, and I know we are dealing with each establishment individually, but it's this slipping into complacency, and then all of a sudden they're caught, and there's lots of apologies. But it's, you know, I still think, and I agree with David, is that the most fundamental role of a waiter, waitress, or bartender is to make sure that underage, you know, drinkers don't get served. And the most fundamental obligation of these people in these establishments was ignored. You know, it wasn't as if they asked for a license and it was false. It wasn't as if the operative lied. It was plain as day, and they failed. So this is, you know, I know that they're making strides to improve, but again, I worry about the slipping into complacency. And that's why I think we're going to stay consistent with the 3-day suspension.
Jim?
Yeah, a similar thought. You know, I'm hearing, you know, we've had owners that want to chase down the employee to the next job, and because they're so angry. We've got owners that want to give them a second chance. Some have been suspended or relieved of hours. These are all business decisions. I'm not in their shoes, so maybe they'll work, maybe they won't, and I honestly wish them all luck. But at the end of the day, you know, that's their business. We've got the regulations, and I agree with John. If whatever training that they go down and whatever methods to make their business successful, they've got to ask for the ID. And you know, as much as you favor one process over the other, at the end of the day, you know, these are the regulations, and this is all I'm responsible for. And I look at it, and I'm going to be consistent again that I think not asking for that ID, it warrants the 3 days.
Thank you. I'm going to be the minority again in disagreeing with this level of sanction. I believe that we have a responsibility as a board to ensure that people comply with our regulations. I think we do have to take into account the seriousness, on a scale of seriousness, that this is very serious. All of them are serious, but knowing that the ABCC views stings as educational tools, I truly believe that a letter of reprimand and a 1-day suspension held in abeyance for a year, as originally recommended by the chief and our town manager and special town council, really is a reasonable sanction, and so we'll continue to support that. And also, again, I think that the board has a responsibility on a go-forward basis that we should revisit our regulations, working with Chief O'Leary and the business owners to see what we can do to team up in making this continue to be a better situation for everybody involved. So, can I have a motion, please?
Do we close the hearings first or not?
Do we?
You have closed
We
each of the hearings. It's necessary to address the disposition as to each of the license holders. And you could
So
do
we're talking
that
about
by way
Saga
of that
right now.
motion, either individually or naming each of them in your motion.
Okay.
Did Jim want to make the,
Take a crack at it.
because you,
Nope.
Okay.
no, only because I'm not quite sure of the wording that we used.
I can make the motion.
Okay.
I move that, thought I could. I move that the sanction to be applied to Saga Hibachi Steakhouse, Showcase Cinema Deluxe, and Tavolino Restaurant be a 3-day suspension
So a letter of-
Letter of reprimand?
and a letter of reprimand, and that the 3 days be served prior to January 31st, 2015, with one of those 3 days occurring on a Friday or Saturday.
I'll second that.
Just for clarification, did I hear it right? You're making one motion for all three?
Yes.
Okay, I'm probably going to vote, I will vote against that, because I think they're three separate hearings, three separate decisions, and depending on which way it goes, I don't
Okay.
want one group tied into another in the court process,
Okay.
or any process.
Yeah.
Actually, you're right, Jim, and we did really only discuss one, so, okay. We just discussed Saga.
So that your motion
So
was
I
for
will,
Saga?
yeah,
Okay.
well, no, my motion was for all of them, so let me withdraw that motion.
Okay.
Do I have to vote to withdraw the motion?
She made the motion, so she can withdraw it.
I can withdraw it. No one seconded it, right? Okay. All right. Okay, so I move that Saga Steakhouse be administered a sanction of a letter of reprimand and 3-day suspension to be served prior to January 31st, 2015, with one suspension day occurring on a Friday or Saturday.
I'll second that.
Any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. The
Madam
next,
Chair, may I address the board, just since you disposed of my case there?
is that,
That's proper.
okay,
Because my understanding from the last go-around is that you were entertaining the licensee to present the days they want to do that.
yes.
I'd be interested in knowing how long a time period we have to give you those days. I understand it has to be done within between now and January 31st, but when do you want the days selected? That's question number one. Question number two is, will you stay that punishment while we file an appeal?
Well, in his first one, we instructed the other operations to communicate with David to give them the dates. The
So I'm
second,
fine to do that. I just didn't want to assume that you were going to do the same process, because you had that meeting, then you had tonight's meeting scheduled. I'm not sure the balance of your schedule or how you want to do this, so.
Bill?
Madam Chair, members of the board, the communication is to be made to town council on this particular matter, but the action that is before the board tonight is to actually reach a final disposition on the previous 3 cases, because that action has allegedly been taken. So I would think it reasonable to have council communicate the days in question for the board's next meeting, which is scheduled for next November 25th.
Mhm.
So it would be the time when you could act on that, the disposition of all 3 of these cases. As far as with respect to the stay of action, that is an action that the board is going to have to address with all of these actions, given the fact that once the letters are issued, the 5-day period begins, and once those letters have been received. So it is something you will have to address, because following tonight's action, once you reach the final disposition of the 3 previous cases, those letters will be sent forthwith, unless the board decides to issue them all at the same time.
Yeah, we have, as you know, we have 2 more hearings of this nature that are scheduled for early December. So there'll be, a similar process, hearing process that will engage in December. At that stage, or sometime before, we will have to address the question of whether or not the board would be inclined to issue a stay during the pendency of any appeals that are taken. It's not required that you address that question now. We can wait until all of the cases are decided in order for you to have all of the information at hand to make that decision. So you could do that at some later time. The decisions which will become final once we've issued the letters, then there is the 5-day appeal period that would commence after that.
The one complicating factor is that the folks that have given you days on which that number can be, that appeal can be served, is actually is now, whereas the hearings will be held on the next one not until December, which then
Right.
cuts into that period of so-called 60-day period which you were going to use to allow people to serve those penalties. That will actually cut down that period of time conceivably.
So you're suggesting that our 60 days is a rolling 60 days, not
Could be, I would
It has
recommend
to
that
be.
you do that, consider it as a
Just to be
rolling
fair.
60 days
It has to
from
be,
the,
yeah.
from the day in which you reach a final conclusion on all these cases.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So in terms of making that decision, though, that would follow the final issuance?
Mhm.
And is,
Would all be
and
issued
it,
the
so
same,
if, so once, we would be notified of an appeal within those 5 days
Mhm.
of issuing it, and then subsequent to that, we would have to have a meeting to make that decision? Or is that linked to that 5-day timeframe?
You could make the determination of whether or not you would issue a stay, coincident with your final decision on the matters that we have scheduled to be heard in December. You could make that an agenda item, if you will, to be discussed and determined following your decision on those cases, just as we've scheduled for tonight. That would be reasonable to do it that way, rather than to make, some determination tonight and then make it again at some later time.
Right. I wanted to make sure we weren't going to be putting ourselves in a situation that we'd be missing a window to address.
No,
something.
because the appeal period really does not commence until the written decision is issued.
Okay.
Can I just add a point? Consideration, is that allowed?
Is that appropriate? Okay.
So the issue of a stay is something that is the discretion of the selectmen. The ABCC doesn't take any position on that. It is within your purview. If it were to be challenged, if somebody said, no, I really want to stay, and they said no, it can be challenged in court. That makes the ability to challenge that is something that's available to the people who have legal resources, okay? The people who retain counsel. I would sort of put to you that you can do this as an administrative matter. You can even declare this before you've made decisions, and you could just say, as a matter of the course of the way we do our regulation in the town, if somebody is going to appeal one of our decisions, we understand how the appeal process works, and we have no problem with holding off the punishment until the appeal process runs its course. And if that person loses the appeal, that punishment, it lands right there, and otherwise it will be adjusted as stated by the ABCC. They'll hand it back to us. I would just present to you that there's no cost to you in the process to say that the idea of allowing a stay, it is our decision. We don't have a problem with that because it would allow the process to play out. What that means to the business is this is a very nerve-wracking time. It's not as bad for us, but other license holders have reservations and commitments and things booked right now into January, probably all the way to about, knowing where we are, the Super Bowl, okay? And it is nerve-wracking to figure out what to do. And in fact, to have to wait to find out if you were going to do a stay or not is doubly nerve-wracking. Like, they'll have to say, well, pull the trigger on that right now because, we can't. So it's adding another kind of punishment indirectly, and I don't know that that's your intention, because this really, in the end, is just an administrative issue.
Okay.
I hope.
Thank you. Okay. All right, so the next business is Showcase Cinema Deluxe. Discussion?
Yeah, I feel the same way, so I can repeat it, or, if it's a different section, but I would
So-
make the motion if it was a 3-day with a letter of reprimand for the same reasons.
John?
Yeah, consistent with that.
Fine.
David and Ginny? Okay.
Fine.
Thanks. Again, I'll take the same position. Can I have a motion? Well, I'll read it, okay. I move that Showcase Cinema Deluxe receive a sanction that includes a letter of reprimand and 3-day suspension, rolling 60 days from, is it the final?
There's 60 days from the date of the written decision? Is that how we're approaching it?
Yes.
So is it 60 days
was
from
60.
5 days from now?
Well, the January 31st date that you set was a date from within which all of the dates should be served, correct?
That was for Group 1.
That was for Group 1.
Right.
All right.
So we're a week later,
We're
so,
1 week later.
so we roll it
From
a
that,
week.
you could roll it forward a week.
Okay. All right, so, to be served on February 7th, and including one weekend day, either Friday or Saturday, for one of those 3 days.
I'll second that.
Discussion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
We'll need to amend your motion for Sega, because I think Sega was the 31st of January, if you intend to be
Okay,
consistent, we'll have to make that change.
all right, so do I need to make a motion to revisit the decision? Okay, so I move that we revisit the decision on Saga Hibachi Steakhouse.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. I move that Saga Hibachi Steakhouse be the recipient of a sanction of letter of reprimand and 3-day suspension, including one weekend day, either Friday or Saturday, to be served prior to February 7th, 2015.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
So,
Okay.
a question for council. So all we did was we made a motion to revisit it. We voted again. The other one's still on the books, correct? Or is that overwritten? Do we need to make a motion to
No, we got the dates.
rescind it?
We got the dates right on that one.
Yeah, we got the dates on Showcase Cinema.
No, I'm
No.
sorry, the SAG.
Saga, no.
The motion was to revisit it. We revisited it, but
And
we
then it-
never rescinded the first
No,
vote.
but you revisited it only for the limited purpose of changing the date from the 31st to the 7th.
Okay.
Everything else remains in effect.
So that was the only thing that changed.
Mhm.
Does that have to be noted in the minutes, the reason for revisiting?
Yeah, the reason for the change was just
Yeah.
the date.
Change the date.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, so the last business is Tavolino. Jim, do you want to start discussion?
Yeah, for the same reasons that I had said before, and I'll be specific on this one. The license was not asked for, and although I commend the steps taken after that in the passion for the business, the fact was the license was not asked for, and that's in a direct violation of the regulations. So, that being said, I would recommend a 3-day suspension, letter of reprimand to be held, to be administered 60 days from the date of issuance.
Same.
Yeah, and just so everyone knows, we don't take, I think you mentioned it the last one, we take no enjoyment doing this.
David?
I really struggle with this one. We're supposed to be treating these all individually, and I think, the presentation that was made is showing buy-in, and I think this is what we want from our licensees. But then going back, that the ID was not asked for. It's not acceptable. So I would recommend 3-day suspension as well.
Ginny?
Yeah, and I also agree, a letter and a 3-day suspension with the, one of the days being on either Friday or Saturday.
Okay. All right. I will, again, stay with my original recommendation. So I move that Tavolino's receive as a sanction a letter of reprimand and 3-day suspension, including 1 weekend day, a Friday or Saturday, to be served prior to February 7th, 2015.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? One. Can we address the stay request at this time?
You could, but before you do that, are there also the invitation to these license holders to contact me or my office
Okay.
with dates that they would suggest for themselves, within the parameters that you set for dates for the suspensions to be imposed.
Okay.
If you would do that, then I'll look to get that correspondence, have it prepared for the board, and then the board will then finalize each of these decisions with those dates.
All right, so for Saga, Showcase Cinema, and Tavolino to please notify our special counsel, David DeLuca, of the 3 dates that you've selected, and we will review them at our next meeting. All right. Okay. Can we talk about the stay request now?
Yeah, I would suggest, however, that you have in the next agenda item is the resolution of the dates from a week ago.
Do that first.
Yeah.
Madam Chair, I would recommend that you place the stay issue on your next agenda.
Okay.
I think it would be cleaner to do it that way.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we've received notification from 3 of the 4 businesses regarding the dates selected. We'll start with Chicky Flynn's. They've selected November 27th, December 1st, and December 26th. That's a Thursday, a Monday, and a Friday.
So you just need to motion.
Motion to accept.
And finalize that.
Okay.
I'll make these.
Okay.
I move that we accept the dates of suspension as presented by Chicky Flynn's of November 27th, 2014, December 1st, 2014, and December 26th, 2014.
Can I have a second, please?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
I move that the Board of Selectmen accept the dates of suspension as presented by the Lafayette House of January 5th, 2015, January 5th, 2015, January 12th, 2015, and January 30th, 2015.
That's a Monday, and a
Monday, Friday.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Do you have the dates for Dimitri's?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
There was one suggested amendment to the Dimitri's. I know council's here. He had initially given us a suggested date of January 3rd, but is now requesting January 2nd.
Is that a Friday?
That's a Friday,
Okay.
yes.
All right, I'll make that motion. Okay, I move that the Board of Selectmen accept the dates of suspension for Dimitri's Red Snapper of Friday, January 2nd, Thursday, January 8th, and Tuesday, January 6th.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please get us the See my handwriting?
And
That's completes your agenda for
The
tonight, right?
What about the Renaissance?
we have no information from the Renaissance?
is not.
Oh, I'm sorry, the Renaissance.
Yes.
Yes, I requested again, and they were just declined the invitation to provide dates, so they're entirely at your discretion within the parameters that you set.
Okay.
We were concerned that the Renaissance may have had like a function or something.
They have functions
Pretty nice.
every weekend, and I've been told that there were functions planned for every one of the weekends between now and the end of January, so there's no good time, if you will.
Have they communicated that to you?
Yes,
Okay. So they cannot suggest dates?
no.
Can you guide us as to,
Well, I think, you know, you've had some dates here that other license holders have found to be reasonable. I think you might take some instruction from that. So I'd suggest that it would be reasonable to be consistent with other dates that you've chosen here.
Given the fact that they have those already designated events, can we approach them and ask them for an open Friday or Saturday as soon as possible after that timeframe?
I think, Madam Chair, you've offered them the opportunity to provide you with dates, and they've chosen not to.
They've chosen not to. Okay.
So it was now your discretion.
Yeah, so we can choose the dates.
Okay.
Is that accurate?
Yeah, I agree, and I think frankly, your decision already confined yourself to the 31st of January in
Yeah.
any event.
Okay. I think I'd suggest we look at,
Actually, if you take a look at the Lafayette House's
Yeah.
schedule of the 5th of
right.
January, which is a Monday, the 12th is a Monday, and the absolute last day of January is 30th, which is a Friday.
And
Those are as far away from the Christmas holidays and New Year's as one could be.
Madam Chair, I would also note in your motion for this that having offered this establishment the opportunity to select dates and having declined,
Mm-hmm.
that these are the dates that you have chosen. I think that's important, given the proposed actions that may occur following this.
Okay.
So just so I'm clear, could I hear from council again, if it's okay, how that dialogue went? Was it a letter, was it a phone call? Just so I'm clear.
It was a couple of different phone calls over the course of the last 2 days that I had with council for Renaissance Hotel. That they just found no ability to find dates that would work for them within the parameters that you had set. So for that reason, they were inclined not to suggest dates. The other statement that may or may not be relevant is their intention was to appeal whatever the finding was. So that I understood from the outset was going to be, what would result here.
Okay.
But I just can't give you any more information
Sure,
than that.
fair enough.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that it wasn't a communication
No, it wasn't
schedule
as though
issue.
we had
Yep.
not had a chance to talk. We actually did. That is, both council and I did speak about it.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, so,
I'll make this motion.
you want to do it?
Okay.
Go ahead.
I move that the Board of Selectmen, upon not receiving any dates from the Renaissance Hotel, will impose the following dates of suspension. Monday, January 5th, 2015, Monday, January 12th, 2015, and Friday, January 30th, 2015.
Can I just have the beginning of the motion read that the board, having offered to the Renaissance the opportunity to select their dates, and they're having
All right,
declined?
I'll do it again, yeah. Given that the Board of Selectmen has offered the Renaissance Hotel the opportunity to submit dates when they could serve the suspension, and having received none from the Renaissance Hotel, the Board of Selectmen will impose the following dates of suspension. January 5th, 2015, January 12th, 2015, and January 30th, 2015.
I'll second the motion.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Excuse me. I voted incorrectly.
We'll just change the vote.
I just want to change my vote. How can I do that?
Well, with respect to the penalty when it's being served, I think, I understand you voted not to impose the 5-day suspension, but having that action carried, you can actually vote to change, to select the dates. Is that accurate?
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. That's right. I'm good. Sorry.
Okay.
Too many nights in a row. I'm done.
It's a confusing issue,
Yeah, I'm sorry.
and I appreciate the board's indulgence here, because it's confusing even for us at times, so
Thank
I can
you.
understand your position, having not dealt with this very often.
Okay, so I think we're done for the evening.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
You can share them with council right after following the meeting.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Asking a discussion.
Oh, want a discussion?
Well, if he's not an attorney, he's a business owner. If there's something that we can do to work out a time that's convenient, because I do understand within 60 days, they all have
Some
holiday
very important
obligations.
events.
If he selects a date, he'd be able to get that letter sooner
Sooner
than
rather
later, and
than
he can
later.
plan for it. So I was gonna, under discussion, saying, could we reconsider and let him speak?
But just, do you want to go through the process of having him work that through Dave like all the rest, just to stay consistent?
I'll give it to him.
Yeah, I think it's just,
Well, we'll be able to, I'll report back to you, because I'm hearing
It's
a week
Tuesday.
from tonight, I think.
Yeah, but what I was suggesting, if the dates are acceptable to the board, we could vote on that tonight. He would get the letter sooner, so he can plan a little bit better. That's all I was gonna suggest.
Other thoughts on that matter is that you still haven't decided whether you're going to stay the execution or not.
That's right, and that's.
And because all it means is that if you give him the dates tonight, the board would then have to, and by the way, it's not on your agenda to act on this tonight,
Yeah.
because it's not listed.
let's stay with the
Well,
process.
no, with all due respect, it wouldn't be on the agenda to vote on it if it was a separate item, but it's still under our jurisdiction. We don't need to tell him to come back a different day. We could change that vote and say, while you're here, we can do it. This is all part of the same process.
Fair enough.
You know,
Fair enough, yeah.
So it's only a separate item if we make it a separate
Fair enough,
item.
yeah, okay, that's fair.
I just see an
I do that.
opportunity if we could
Okay.
help
All
him
right,
with the
let's
schedule.
do it this way. So
Fair
I'm gonna retract my motion to adjourn. Okay. Tell us what you have.
Let's make it some more
Wait,
complicated.
all those in favor of staying?
The employees just met. They want November 27th, December 25th, February 7th, Friday.
11/27, 12/25,
2/7.
2/7,
Oh, I'm sorry, 2/6 is the Friday, 2/7 is the Saturday.
2/6.
Yeah.
Can
Yeah.
you just say those dates one more time? I'm sorry.
November 27th, December 25th, February 6th.
You do realize December 25th is Christmas?
Yeah.
Okay.
We're not going to do, they don't want to work that day, and so we're going to run just a very skeleton day.
Okay.
It's pulling teeth staffing that day anyway, so.
Okay, I'll make a motion that the Board of Selectmen accept the proposed dates from Tavolino of November 27th, December 25th, and February 6th.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Just as a comment, we're probably going to take that punishment. We don't have the resources to appeal, so.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor? Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.